Hey, y'all. Welcome to the Reckless Optimist podcast. My name is Megan. I'm a family nurse practitioner with a deep passion for mental health. On this show, we showcase guests who have shown tenacity, grit, mental strength, and who embody the word resilience. A quick disclaimer before we start. This show is not a substitute for mental diagnosis or treatment. We do recommend that if you're struggling with your own emotional well-being, you see a mental health provider. I'm so excited that you guys are here. Let's get into it. Hey, everyone. Today on the podcast, we have Alex. I met Alex through my husband, Hans. They actually knew each other back in Lexington, Kentucky. Alex came to one of his men's group and did a kind of a personal testimony on his whole story. And Hans was like, you need to get this guy on your show. He has an amazing story. And let me tell you, he really does. I teared up in this interview. His arc of going from a pain pill addiction to a heroin addiction to being homeless, living under a bridge in Dayton, Ohio, to now he is a PhD professor at University of Kentucky in Lexington. I mean, it's such an amazing story, a transformational story. He is an addiction scientist, and he's also the co-founder of Voices of Hope Lexington. I know you guys are going to love this story, so let's get into it. Hey, everyone. Help me welcome Alex to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I'm glad that you're here. So me and you know each other because my husband met you a few years ago at a men's group. Is that right?
That's correct. Yep.
Yeah. And you were like the keynote speaker that came in and talked to the group.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. He said that your story really resonated with him. And we were driving the other day and he was like, oh my gosh, I have the perfect guy for the podcast. And so we got to connect.
Well, I'm honored that it stuck in his head. I think it's been a few years, so that's meaningful. It's great.
That's awesome. Well, I can't wait to hear your story. Before we do, we're going to start our episode out with a quote like we do each time. And the quote for your episode is by Glennon Doyle. And I've actually quoted her before on my show because I'm obsessed with her work, her books. So this is from her quote from Untamed, one of my favorite books. She is a sober author. And the quote goes, "Recovery is an unbecoming. My healing has been a peeling away of costume after costume." What does that quote mean to you?
Well, immediately what comes to mind is that I love people with lived experience. So I love the basis for this podcast. I love that the author that you quoted has lived experience. And for me, a lot of what my lived experience taught me about recovery, I like to tell people that abstinence is about what you don't do and recovery is about what you do instead. And so in some ways, I see a similarity there. In Unbecoming, it's this whole process that transcends whether or not you use drugs. It's about something that's a lot more meaningful than that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love that answer. Yeah, for me, when I hear this quote, I think of a few things. I mean, ultimately, when you get sober, you get to rediscover your true identity. And I feel like that's like one of the best gifts of sobriety. And, you know, any substance that you take in, alcohol, drugs, whatever, you create an altered version of yourself. For some people, that may not be a negative thing, but if you abuse those substances, 9 times out of 10, it's probably a negative version of who you were. I know from my own experience, I lied. I was making flaky decisions. I was not good on my word. I had zero integrity as a person. And that is not who I am at my core. And not to get like all existential, but I think ultimately when you become who you authentically are, you learn to love yourself. And I think learning to love yourself is the meaning of life.
Yes. And it's one of the gifts of recovery. I mean, most of us come to it because we're forced one way or another by life circumstances or the courts or family or whatever, really just to try to figure out how to stop having consequences. But what a wonderful byproduct of the process for it to be such a rediscovery of life and maybe an actual like discovery of self, a first discovery of self. So.
Yeah. And I love the visual that she gave in the quote. I'm such a visual person, but like taking off the costumes, like I can see myself just like ripping off these like masks that I was wearing and being raw, but who I like as that raw person, you know?
Sure. Oh yeah. When I tell my story in person sometimes and bring pictures, I have a picture from early and active addiction that is, it might as well be a Halloween. It's so different from who I am now. And I think that fits to a T.
I know I've done some like before and after picture of me in active addiction 6 months before where I was literally, my face was so swollen. The life had left my eyes,
yes.
Right? I know you know what I'm talking about. And then me now with life in my eyes, and it's drastic, the difference that can come.
Yeah. I teach a lot about lots of different things related to addiction, but when we talk about addiction in the brain, one of my favorite ways to relate it in layman's terms is to help people understand that recovery in your brain is like life going from black and white to color. That's what it was for me. It was like there's color in my television all of a sudden, and things have a third dimension, and things have depth and weight, and they're meaningful, and it's a beautiful thing.
I love that. I say that all the time. It's like my life was in black and white, and now it's in vivid hypercolor.
Yes, yes.
I love that visual so much. Well, I'm so excited to hear your story. I do not know your whole story. I just know a tiny bit from what Hans has told me. So wherever you feel comfortable, just take us back.
Sure. Well, I will tell you, I never quite know where I'm going to go when I tell this story, but I always start in the same place. And that's by telling people that I grew up really privileged. And I promise you, I don't do that because it's hip in 2025 or because I'm trying to virtue signal or anything like that. It's because it's true. I grew up in the suburbs. I went to private school. My dad's a doctor. My mom's an accountant. I've never experienced anything bad as a kid, no adverse childhood experiences. I wasn't neglected or abused. My parents didn't use drugs. They're wonderful human beings. And so it's really just, I'm fortunate in that sense. But I inherited some risk factors that, as you probably know well, they're not things that we ask for, but they're things that matter. And so the first was like a genetic predisposition for addiction, ton of addiction in my extended family. Didn't know that when I was 13, but it certainly increased my risk. And then secondly, from the time that I was young, about 13, I've struggled with anxiety. And for the first 12 years of my life on planet Earth, I'm telling you, I don't know if this is a universal experience or if this was just my experience, but everything was easy for the first 12 years of life. That's how I remember it. Everything was simple, and school came easy, and social life came easy, and sports came easy, and everything's easy and effortless. And I guess kind of makes sense in some way. And then starting about 13 with adolescence and puberty and all that awful stuff, I started to experience anxiety. And I ended up being diagnosed with 3 different anxiety disorders. So generalized anxiety disorder, which is garden variety anxiety, right? Social anxiety disorder, which is manifests in different ways. For me, I don't like to be around a lot of people at once. That's part of it, but there are some different things we could talk about there. But third, the one that people are like least familiar with. Are you familiar with trichotillomania?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Are you a clinician?
I'm a nurse practitioner.
I usually tell people they only know trichotillomania if they have a clinical background, they have trich themselves, or their Latin prefixes and suffixes are really strong. But yeah, so it's a hair pulling disorder, anxiety disorder. And for me, I don't know why, it was my eyebrows. And so when I was in like 7th or 8th grade, I would just I'd be taking a test, and I'm right-handed. And so I would be, working away, and my left hand would just creep up and pull and pull and pull. And, just because it's funny, I'll share with you. We went to family Thanksgiving in Ohio, and my cousin did like a double take across the Thanksgiving dinner table. He was like, "Oh my God, Aunt Shelley, what happened to Alex's eyebrows? He looks like a jack-o'-lantern," which is an awful stigmatizing thing to say, but he was like 8 years old. So I always say we forgive him. And I think the reason I fixate a little bit every time I share about my experience with addiction the reason I fixate on my mental health is because for me, they're inexorably linked. I didn't get diagnosed with those disorders until I was 22 years old and at my second treatment center. And so for me, that meant I spent like a decade of my life struggling against these disorders that I didn't know what to do with, because I'm just kind of an ignorant 14-year-old kid trying to get through the world. And so I started experimenting. Certainly nicotine was the gateway drug for me. I played golf and basketball and baseball at my high school in Lexington, and the older guys on the baseball team dipped tobacco. And when I was, I don't know if this is a rural Kentucky thing or what, but when I was 13, it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And I was like, oh my God, I got to do that. And I loved the way that it made me feel, and there were no immediate negative consequences. And I tried alcohol, and I've never been a person who really enjoys alcohol. It kind of upsets my stomach and just makes it really easy to choose not to drink. I think I was 15, I smoked cannabis for the first time. And I remember, all of the descriptors that I could use here. What I remember mostly is like exhaling for the first time. That's what it felt like for me, is for the first time in my life, it felt like, at least subjectively for the moment, like my anxiety dissipated a little bit, like my shoulders kind of dropped. And, for better or for worse, I just learned a profound lesson. Like, I can take something from outside my body and I can put it in my body and I can manage the way that I feel. And for somebody who's having an awfully hard time managing the way they feel, that's pretty powerful. And so pretty early on, I had a sense that the drugs are bad narrative just didn't quite fit. At least it didn't fit with my experience, because so far drugs were really good. In fact, they were about as medicinal as anything on the planet that I had found for want of clinical care. And so I got the chance to go to college to play baseball. It wasn't a big deal. It was Division III baseball. But when you have an 18-year-old kind of male ego like I did, I thought I was a big deal. I got into college and started I think the combination of that freedom and independence, but also the new social environment kind of was difficult with my social anxiety. And so I started just smoking so much weed and just an enormous amount of weed all the time. I had surgery to have my wisdom teeth removed my second semester, and I got prescribed oxycodone, and I took it exactly as prescribed, but it didn't matter. I got dry sockets, so I ended up getting a second prescription for oxycodone. So long story short, I got addicted to oxycodone. There's any number of stories to tell you about this. I think addiction took me all the bad places that people go. Went to jail on drug trafficking charges. I went in and out of treatment and in and out of treatment and in and out of treatment. And I'm really fortunate in the sense that I'm a person whose parents would dip into their 401k to pay for another treatment and another treatment. But there's something about what we were doing that obviously wasn't working. Part of the reason I say that is because, people tell their stories different ways, and everybody's lived experience is valid. And I'll tell you mine. My experience was I was trying so hard to stop, and I couldn't stop. And I just mean that in a straightforward way. I wasn't under any illusions about, do I want to keep doing this? Am I enjoying this? I wasn't getting high anymore. I wasn't having fun. I was experiencing every consequence under the sun. I promise you, in no uncertain terms, I wanted to stop, and I couldn't stop. And it was just that simple. And I had a chance to go back to a seventh inpatient treatment center. That's not counting outpatient and intensive outpatient and therapists and all the things. And I can still remember the tone of my sweet mother's voice when she said to me, "Alex, if you choose not to go back to treatment," she said, "you need to think very carefully about the decision that you make next. Because if you choose not to go back to treatment, then we can't support you anymore." And I just remember thinking, I've done this 6 times before, and I've tried in earnest, by the way. Right? Like, I'm not just showing up to get, I'm trying so hard, and it's not working. And by the way, when I go to treatment, it's not a 30-day resort. It's misery. It's suffering. And I get out on the other side, and I relapse, and I devastate everyone that I love. And I don't want to be a part of this anymore. And so I said no. So I'm not going, And so long story short there, I became estranged from my family, and the bottom fell out in some sense, which, some people describe as a good thing, but that's not my experience. And I pushed back on that really firmly. Things went from bad to worse. I started injecting heroin. I experienced homelessness in Nashville, Tennessee, in Lexington, Kentucky, in Cincinnati, Ohio. And then finally in Dayton, Ohio, sleeping under a bridge, Highway 35 overpass that ran through downtown Dayton, and just a stereotype, holding a cardboard sign that said homeless and hungry, and injecting drugs and sharing syringes and sleeping on a tarp on a ledge under the bridge and all those things. And I checked into a Salvation Army, which is a homeless shelter there in Dayton that has kind of a treatment component. As an addiction scientist now, I would reflect on that and say they're probably not exactly using all these evidence-based practices. It's a pretty grassroots shoestring organization, but my goodness, am I grateful that they were there, because they gave me a shower and a bed and a place to go. And really slowly things started to change for me. And I ended up spending 6 months at the Salvation Army, this shelter, estranged from my family. And I wish that I could say that that's just the end of the story, because I just always like to tell people that recovery is not a meritocracy. A meritocracy is just where hard work equals success. And I just think, man, if recovery was meritocracy, I would have recovered a long, long time ago, because I've been trying so hard for so long. But unfortunately, it just that's not my experience and the experience of those around me. And so when I graduated the Salvation Army, I've got all these barriers that are really, everybody who listens to your podcast, I think, will be familiar with that. I have bad credit, and I have lots of debt, and I have a criminal record, and I have no college degree, and I have no marketable skills. And I got on food stamps, but I was disqualified from most forms of supportive housing because I have drug trafficking charges. And so I didn't know where I was going to live. And so anyways, the list of barriers that people face is, in that position, leaving treatment, leaving incarceration, it's endless. What a different experience it is when you come from a position like mine, where you have access to the things that you need. And I don't care if you want to call it privilege or social determinants of health or access, or in my world, addiction science, we call it recovery capital, whatever you want to call it. I had it, and I had it in spades. And so, When I left the Salvation Army, like I said, I didn't know where I was going to be housed, but my dad went to a church in Lexington, and the church let me sleep at the parsonage, which is like the little church house, for free. It's really hard, I think. Like, you'll hear that and you'll go, oh, that's nice, that's helpful. But you got to unpack that for a second, because it's hard to overstate how meaningful it is that I didn't have to worry about making rent and I didn't have to worry about getting evicted, which means it also puts a whole lot less pressure on me to immediately go and find a job. And so now in these first weeks that I'm transitioning out of 6 months at this treatment, this shelter, I can spend that time marshaling all my energy and all my effort and all my focus towards my recovery and my mental health. And I can really take care of and I always compare my experience to my buddy Jason, who graduated the Salvation Army with me, didn't have the same family support or the same financial support. And so he can't do that. He's at the Gateway shelter and he's got to go find a way to get a job immediately, because he's got to dig his way out of his court fees and his restitution and his debt. And, just the psychosocial stress associated with that I didn't have to deal with. And it's, I guess it's worth stressing the point that it's not because I'm better than him. It's not because I'm smarter. It's not because I worked harder. It's not because I wanted my recovery more. I don't mean to shoot shots at all, but just, again, speaking from my experience, it's not because I was more honest than him or more open-minded than him or more willing than him. It's because I had more of the things that I needed, And so I don't want to just keep going down an exhaustive list, but that's the way that it went for me with housing, with employment, with transportation, with education. And that's just the big ones. I can't even tell you about all the stuff in between. And so anyways, I guess I'll just wrap this part of it by saying, I know that there's nothing special about my addiction. I think especially for people with opioid use disorder, my whole trajectory from, iatrogenic addiction that begins with a prescription to, transitioning to heroin and all the things maybe is pretty typical. But I like to tell people sometimes that there is something special about my recovery. And I always want to be so careful that I am not saying that I'm special. I promise you, it's not why I came on your podcast. But what I'm saying is I have had special access to the things that I needed and to recovery capital, to the ingredients of recovery. And so that's been so much of my mission going forward, whether it's, my work in the nonprofit space or professionally or whatever it is, that it turns out that what really predicts recovery is recovery capital, not how much you're using drugs or how little you're using drugs or how long you've been abstinent. The recovery capital seems to be the best proxy that we have. And that's really the focus of our work.
Wow. I got teared up in your story. I think creating the visual of you, it's going to make me cry talking about it now, of you under that bridge in Dayton, Ohio. I've been through Dayton. I know exactly what Dayton looks like. And to see you now, it makes me so teary, because you literally look like a celebrity. Like, you're super fit, super handsome, super well-spoken, super passionate, super intelligent. But you were those things then too, you know what I mean? But a substance had literally tried to kill you, oh my God, it's amazing to see you become what you are now, because I don't know, maybe I'm overstating the stats here, but about 90% of those people would be dead if they were you. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And speaking of just looking so different and speaking of costumes from that first quote, it just makes me think, when I was under the bridge, I was wearing some jeans that I'd gotten out of a Salvation Army donation pile that didn't really fit me. So they were sagging pretty badly. And this free Obama Biden t-shirt that I had found. And my entire life, coming from like a privileged social position and being pretty tall and broad-shouldered and whatever, people at least acknowledge me when I walk into a room. It was incredible how quickly, when I started wearing the costume of homelessness, you just become an ick to everyone around you, that people walk by you, people treat you with disdain. Yeah. And so that's why I really appreciated that you said all those nice things about me now, but also acknowledging that those things were true about me then. I think one of the hardest things to appreciate, even going back to just touching on the brain a little bit about addiction, is that at the same time that someone is compulsively injecting themselves with drugs to their own detriment, that there are these entire parts of their brain that are almost completely unaltered. So when I was under the bridge, I could do calculus and I could debate Western political theory, but I couldn't keep a job. All those things are true at the same time. Do you know what I mean? And it's part of the baffling part of addiction. Certainly, I was in a place where everything was unmanageable.
Yeah. I have a few questions. One is, how many years sober are you? So to get the timeline, how old were you when you actually got into full long-term sobriety?
Yes. My addiction started when I was 18, and it was about 2009, 2010. In 2013, I got into recovery. So I've been coming up on 12 years.
Wow. That's awesome. Long-term sobriety.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then my other question I wanted to ask you about some of the early days was, how were you able to get access to oxycodone? I mean, I know during that time, doctors were more freely giving those prescriptions out, and maybe you were caught up in that, but how were you getting that access?
Yeah. Great question. Yeah. So in 2010, I'm in Kentucky, and I know this happened largely nationally too. In 2010, we passed what we call colloquially the pill mill bill, which was the first attempt to really shut down access to the pain clinics. And so that really changed the on the ground drug market. And so where oxycodone and most pain medication like that had been like $1 a milligram, the price went up 50%, and then it doubled, and it just became kind of untenable. And that's part of the reason why it's a large part of the reason why so many people, right, made the push to heroin. Is it just became far too expensive to keep pursuing pain medication, so they dried up. I mean, to be honest with you, even during that period of time that I was in addiction.
Yeah. When you were in the Salvation Army, I'm just curious, did they do a 12-step program, or did they give you a sponsor, or what was that recovery like?
Yeah. So the Salvation Army is what they call a Christ-centered program. So it's a faith-based program that uses. I don't know that they directly incorporate 12-step ideology. It is. I think 12-step ideology is like inescapable in most treatment settings. Definitely, we were encouraged to go to 12-step meetings. 12-step programs were a huge part of my early recovery, like huge.
Yeah. And I love a 12-step program. That first year, that's where most people will fall off the wagon, go to do field research because one, they haven't learned how to deal with their stress in the right way, or they're just pulled back to the dark side because their brain remembers, right? That neuroplasticity. So what do you feel like that first year helped you so much to stay on the straightened line?
Yeah. So I would go back to that I call recovery capital. Just, I had so much help creating, if you want to say it in kind of colloquial 12-step terms, we talk about changing people, places, and things. I had so much help doing that, because that sounds like a choice, would just change your people, places, and things. But what you're talking about is moving jobs, moving relationships. I mean, that's significant, right? It's difficult, if not, impossible in some cases to do alone. And I was just aided every step of the way. So for me, a big part of what addiction took from me was education. I am just a self-proclaimed nerd. It's just like it's how I am, and I'm proud of it. And I really lost touch with that in addiction, not just losing my formal education, but I stopped reading books. I stopped just devouring information, stopped having interesting conversations like that. It just, that's so much of what addiction took from me. And so a really important part of my recovery was being afforded the opportunity to get back into school. It offers me some really good structure. I work really well having the deadlines out in front, having something to work towards. That's a lot of the way that I have to organize my life today anyways. So.
Yeah, I'm very, very similar to that. I totally track with what you're saying.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, we could probably do a whole podcast episode on the why, quote unquote, the why. So by that, I mean, they say the alcohol, the drug isn't necessarily the problem. It's the ineffective solution. So some people say the why is really important to figure out in recovery. Some people will debate it doesn't actually even matter. Did you ever figure out your why?
Yeah. Yeah. First of all, I love the part, speaking of 12-step programs, I love the part in the big book where it talks about, if you ask a drinker why they have a problem, I'm paraphrasing here, but that they might give you all sorts of answers, but that fundamentally they really don't know why. And I think that's largely true for a lot of us. Although for me, there's no question that it was connected in some way to my anxiety. And so a big part of my recovery from my substance use disorder has really been related to my recovery from my anxiety disorders. I've been a person who's always been able to function and manage and hide it pretty well. I think as human beings, we do that. In 2025, we do that, especially as men, we do that. But a lot of what recovery gave me, the introspection that you get in recovery, is a lot of what helped me with my anxiety too. Because I tell people, there's a litany of things that I do now to address my anxiety. And one of them is, and it's just one, but one of them is a little bit of acceptance of the fact that I have anxiety. And that's just part of what recovery's given me. Sometimes it's just there. And my first sponsor used to say, make friends with it because it'll probably be there again.
Yeah, no, I relate to you. I relate to you so much. I mean, our stories are very different, but in some ways similar. And I think that's what's so cool about doing these shows and meeting these people all over the world is that I grew up very similar to you. I grew up very privileged. My dad was also a doctor. I went to private school, and I didn't have big T trauma. I also had anxiety, and that was ultimately my why as well. Trying to figure out, okay, I have anxiety. Something, when you're a kid, you don't know. You think that you're crazy or that you're abnormal or something is wrong with you. How do we fix this? And then, like you had mentioned, when you took the first joint, it felt like exhaling. That's what it felt like when I had my first drink. Like, oh
Yes.
my God, that weight of the world is off of my chest. And when you're a kid, you cling to that.
Yes. Yeah. And it's even, I relate to the way you say that off your chest, because when I guess I probably didn't mention to you, but I also was trained as a marriage and family therapist. And when I used to do clinical work with clients who had anxiety disorders, we would talk about where do you hold it? And I just think generally you can divide people into stomach people and chest people. And I was a chest person. Just anxiety for me, that's the quickest way I knew it was coming. Is it was like there's an elephant sitting on my chest and I don't know why. And so, yeah, it's been a really long journey, just the same way that we're figuring out my substance use disorder has been, figuring out my anxiety has been a really long journey, to the extent that, I made some significant changes as recently as 2 years ago. So I think it's just always a process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I took away the alcohol after some time, my anxiety got so much better. I think it was throwing fire on it, throwing
Yes.
gasoline on a fire. But I still have, some normal anxiety. And I love how you said, like, accepting that. I feel like that's such good advice. And also realizing that just because you have anxiety, like, that's actually a normal human function to keep you alive, which is important. But I wanted to ask you, now that you're 12 years into recovery, what helps you now with your anxiety? Like, what tools do you use?
Yeah, great question. So I will tell you, early on throughout my life, I have had therapists and clinicians of every stripe suggest meditation to me. And I can't tell you how many times I scoffed and rolled my eyes and said, oh, I'm going to own my way to happiness. Like, forget you. And I'm just here to tell you that I was wrong, that it turns out meditation's really effective, that it turns out it's most effective as a practice. And it took me a long time to really have maybe the discipline or the desire or whatever it is, but just mindfulness in general, I think, is really helpful. It's really just hard to underscore that. And as a scientist, there's tons of research to support that. Meditation physically shrinks the size of your amygdala, the fear center in your brain. That's pretty cool. Like, shrink the size of my fear center. Why not? Exercise has been a huge part of my recovery from the beginning. At the Salvation Army, there was a gospel mission that had we called it the homeless gym, which is probably really not appropriate terminology, but at the time that's what we called it. It's just where you could work out for free. And it was like a saving grace for me. The acute benefits, whether it's just a runner's high and feeling good, but also the chronic benefits of upregulating dopamine. It's like organic medicine to the addicted brain. So even if don't want to be a bodybuilder or a weightlifter or whatever, marathon runner, walking in the sunshine has just a multitude of benefits. Another thing that I, at one time in my life, would have rolled my eyes at, and I would have said, you don't understand. I have real problems. I have anxiety and a heroin addiction, and you're telling me to walk in the sunshine. And it's like, yeah, but that might be 2.5% of what your recovery looks like. That might be a piece of the puzzle. And then, having said all of that, 10 years into recovery, you mentioned getting married. I also recently got married. I got married about 2 years ago. And that comes with some anxiety in and of itself. Don't tell my wife I said that, but it does. And so I decided to get on a medication, on Prozac, on a SSRI. Speaking only for myself, I am so much better for it. And I frankly regret that I didn't do it long ago. It's taken the edge off in exactly the way that I'd hoped. And yet I was afraid that I would stop working out, lose all my motivation, become a different person, not care about work. And none of that's been my experience. And so that's not to say that that's everyone's answer. But I also just say that to say I've been pretty effectively coping with my anxiety for 8 years and still made a decision to do something different. And so, yeah, I think that for everybody, it's this ongoing process where you have to keep checking in and saying, is what I'm doing working, and what do I need to tweak?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I have a lot of patients that come to my clinic that have so much fear about starting medication. Are they going to become a zombie? All of that. And I think it's not for everyone, but it is for some people, 100%. It can be part of the puzzle, not the whole puzzle. You have
Correct.
to continue doing the things like you talked about. I love what you talked about with meditation. I also feel that way. I struggled so much with it in the beginning. I'm like, all these books, they're telling me to do this, and I hate it because I'm so high energy. But I think ultimately it forces you to live in the present moment. We so often live in the past and the future. And same thing with intense exercise, or even just exercise forces you to live in the right now. And that is also a piece of the puzzle,
That is exactly it. No, that is exactly right. Yeah. And in fact, I had read, maybe after the fifth therapist had recommended it to me, I read that meditation is is best suited for those who want to do it least. That's like, yeah, people with anxiety or ADHD or whatever, people who might benefit the most are the ones who are least likely to just want to sit there and be still. But yeah, I run, go. When I wake up in the morning, I'm doing 95 miles an hour downhill. And so I got to apply the brakes in some way.
That's so funny because that's literally what my husband would say to you. You're like wide ass open the second you jump out of the bed because he's like a slow wake up guy and I'm like ready to go. I wanted to talk about all of the amazing stuff that you're doing now. I mean, to go from sleeping under a bridge to being a professor at University of Kentucky, like that arc, I need to know how you got there, the education that you got. Give us kind of that take.
Yeah, the flyover on that is, as I said before, most importantly, that I had just an insane amount of help and support. And I think I'm not, so often with somebody with any type of condition or minoritized identity who has success, we treat it like exceptionalism. And I always want to be careful, like it's not me. I didn't do some amazing thing. I really believe that this is what recovery would look like. This would be standard procedure if people had the support that I had. I just think that's true. And so for me, it was getting back to school, getting my undergraduate degree, started recovery slow. I took the advice of everyone who said you can't go get it all back right away. And so my first job, which I got not because I deserved it or earned it by merit, but because my dad knew a guy, just to be clear, I got a job working on a tobacco farm at UK. I think my title was like agricultural research assistant. So it made me feel good, but really I was digging holes. And it was great for me. It was manual labor. I was out in the sun. It was good early recovery work. And I tell you that to tell you that one day I was sitting on the back of a truck, taking a break, smoking a cigarette, and talking to one of my supervisors. And he said, what do you want to do with your life? You don't want to work in this tobacco patch forever. And I said, I think I want to help people. I think I want to do drug and alcohol counseling, but I don't really know where to start. And he said, that's crazy. My wife works in a department at UK that has something like that. And so that kind of serendipitous start, I only applied to one graduate program and that was it. And I got in and it was a marriage and family therapy program at UK and just fell in love with learning again. I think realizing what I took for granted in college when I was just using and not, what an opportunity it is. Just what an opportunity to education and to have access. And so I was devouring and I was learning and developing and started learning about recovery capital and realizing how neatly it fit with my experience, how much it explained. Like the main research question that I start with always is it's like a version of survivor's guilt, honestly. How come I'm here and my best friend on this planet is in Kentucky waiting to go to prison for 7 years for trafficking, and my friends are in cemeteries and they made all the same choices that I did. And when you ask the general public, what's the difference? They'll say things like, well, you must have wanted it, or you must have been ready, or you must have all those kinds of things. And that's so unsatisfactory to me. And I just realized that recovery capital really explained a lot of that, just having these things that I needed. And so, yeah, I ended up staying in. I learned I wasn't a very good therapist, probably because I have anxiety disorders. And so I think I was passing those on. And so I went back and finished my doctorate. And it turns out I'm a nerd for research. And I guess the last thing I'll say in answer to this question is I'm especially fortunate because I'm in a really unique position where I do traditional faculty work, where I teach in the classroom and I do original research. But really the majority of my job is as a translational scientist, which is just a fancy way of saying I go into the community and teach. So I get to teach judges and lawyers and prosecutors, and I get to teach doctors and PAs and, anybody who will listen, honestly. And so it's a really cool way to get to engage with the community and reduce stigma. And I'm really grateful to be positioned the way that I am.
Yeah, I mean, you're extremely valuable. You not only have the life experience, but now you also have the degrees. I also love when you were talking about, I'm imagining you sitting on the back of a truck in that tobacco farm. Have you ever read The Alchemist? Do you know what the book I'm referring to?
No, someone just said that to me like a week ago. That's crazy.
I'm picturing you as the protagonist in that book because the universe conspires to help you when it's right. And I feel like all of the universe aligned for you because when things are going really easy, like they were like everything was just put into place for you to get to where you needed to be.
Yes.
It was because that was your destiny. That was your personal legend to live, to do what you're doing now. And it's just like a zipper, like clicking into place,
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Sometimes people will ask, well, knowing what you know now, being where you are, would you go do it all again? And, the fairy tale answer would be yes. But the honest truth is, in the middle of an opioid overdose crisis in 2025, I'm not sure I'd survive it again, just to be candid. And so The answer is no. But I know exactly what you mean. And I do think that in so many respects, yeah, the universe aligned, things came in and aligned in the sense that, we alluded to the brain a couple of times. We know these changes in your brain are long-term changes. And yet I kept going to these 30-day treatment centers, and I would get out after 30 days and think, I must be fixed. I've done the work. I just had a graduation, and where I come from, graduation means you're done, buddy. Go be free. And then I would go. And, 3 days later, I couldn't understand how it was that I'd gotten high the night before. I actually couldn't understand. I couldn't. And so, yeah, part of the serendipity of this last go round was I kind of tripped and fell into this continuum of care too, where it was like really long, much more extensive rather than intensive, and made all the difference.
Yeah, no, I understand. I see so much more success from a 30-day program to a 12-month residential program. Definitely. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. I had not heard of that term, recovery capital, and I love that term. How do we fix that? Like because I hear this problem and I agree with you. This is a problem and I want to fix it. How do I help you fix this?
Yeah, it's a huge problem because it's not an easy fix. But I think part of maybe a simpler way to talk about it in some sense is that to the general public, even to I'm sure to a lot of your colleagues in the healthcare field, in the criminal legal system, if the problem is you're taking drugs, then the solution is to stop taking drugs. It's just this oversimplification in their minds that all we have to do is get people to stop using. But I guess I'll start just by using myself as an example. I have 3 anxiety disorders that weren't being treated. Stopping using drugs was not a solution to the problem. It wasn't. In fact, my subjective experience was worse every time I stopped using drugs. Now, you're right. My cannabis use probably was on a global level contributing to my anxiety, but it was at least giving me a brief respite right in the moment. And so I think so much of addiction and recovery gets boiled down to you just need to stop using, and then these things will fall into place. And in so many ways, the way that we operate at our nonprofit is kind of the other way around. What if we started by actually tilling the soil and changing the conditions of your life? And does that change your relationship to drugs? So just let me give you just one example, if that's okay. Tell you a quick story. Our community center is on Broadway in Lexington, and our sign out front says Recovery Community Center. And to most people, the word recovery just means abstinence, just means don't take drugs, right? And so there's a woman who's experiencing homelessness, and she's pushing her shopping cart out in front of our center every single day. And she has an opioid use disorder, but every time she sees the sign and she reads Recovery Community Center, she hears abstinence center in her head. And so she's like, that's not for me. Because for all the complicated reasons we could talk about, she's just not interested in that moment. So pushes her cart by. And so one day randomly, she hears that she can get her laundry done at Voices of Hope. Like, we have a washer and a dryer we offer, and all that you have to do is chat with a coach. You don't have to go to treatment or commit to any kind of behavior change. You just chat and do your laundry. And so she does this for 3 weeks. True story. Does this for 3 weeks. And on the 3rd week, she comes in, puts her laundry in, charges her phone, gets a cup of coffee, goes out back to smoke a cigarette on the smoking pad. And out of the clear blue sky, she turns her head to the recovery coach and she's like, hey, if I wanted to get into treatment, could you get me into treatment? Coach is like, girl, if you want to get into treatment, we'll have you there in an hour. It's what we do. And so the reason I tell you that story is because I think it's such a good example of if our preoccupation at the very beginning had been on just forcing her to be abstinent, if as soon as she had come through our doors, if we had said, hey, we can get you into treatment today, even though we mean well, and even though that's in good faith and it's earnest, probably what she's going to do is tuck tail and go the other way. She's just not in a place for that. She's not in that stage of change, or however you want to talk about it. But it doesn't mean she's not ready. It doesn't mean she's not willing. It doesn't mean she's not sick and tired of being sick and tired. I mean, I reject all of those ideologies. What it means is we got to meet her right where she is. And so that's, it's cheesy, but I had a baseball coach that used to say, you have to connect before you correct. And it's just, it's about the fact that so much of this happens in relationship. And so instead of saying, hey, we'll accept you once you get sober, we say, we accept you as you are, because you're a human being, even as you continue to use drugs. Just like I was a human being standing under the bridge. But if you want to do something about it, if you want to change that, we're actually in the perfect position to help you do that. And we find that to be a much more inclusive way. It's a bigger umbrella for recovery.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that. I'm going to remember that quote that you said. Bank it in my brain.
Yep.
I wanted to ask you if you could go back in time, like time travel, to your younger self, 18, 19, what would you say? What would you say to that kid?
Oh my goodness. That's a great question. I kind of get the opportunity to do that a little bit because lots of, parents of teenagers or young adults come to me when they're worried about their loved ones. And it's incredibly challenging because I find, we talk a lot about ego in recovery, and I find that sometimes ego is the strongest during that age, where, at least for me, I had the least to stand on because I hadn't gone out on my own yet. I didn't know who I was yet. And so a lot of the opinions that I held, a lot of the things that I put forth, it's just very straw man and it's very shaky because it's not solid yet. And so that means it's dripping with ego. And so anyways, I say all that to say, I know I would have been a challenge to deal with because that's just the case. But I think I would have told myself that you inherently know that continuing to use drugs is not the most effective way to manage your anxiety, and that you know that there's a better way. And that if you're willing to do the work to explore it, that you'll find it. Yeah. I think I might say something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because I know for me, if someone had said that to me, I wouldn't have listened anyway, but it was all supposed to be. It was all supposed to be the way it was.
That's what I want to say. Yeah, I didn't want to give you a fatalistic answer. That's the truth about how I feel. That I feel like the conditions, that's why I focus on things like recovery capital, because I feel like the conditions that led to my addiction are so much greater than something someone might have said to me once, you know? Yeah. We want to say the powerful thing, but maybe addiction's more powerful than that.
How do you deal with not being able to save everyone? I thought when I became a nurse practitioner, I could save everyone. I could save you from addiction. I could save you from everything. And I have learned that Pollyanna attitude is not going to serve me well. I have got to let go control of that. Yes. And I was curious how you did that.
So because I started in a 12-step program and because I started, that's really what I credit with helping me so much early on. That was the ideology that I carried forward in the beginning, which was a little bit more like, when you've had enough, you'll come to me and I'll be here with my hand outstretched, but I'm not going to go to you. Over the last decade or so, that's shifted a lot for me. I actively do research and work in the harm reduction space, which takes a little bit of a different tact. However, having said that, I still think even the most hardcore harm reductionists would tell you that harm reduction itself faces a question, which is, we want to respect people's agency and we want to respect their autonomy to make decisions for themselves. But what do you really do at the point that someone is just killing themselves before your eyes? And I've just gone through this with a friend. And at some point, just sitting idly by watching it continue is also not harm reduction. It's possibly harm production. And so it's really challenging. I can tell you that in the beginning, I carried a lot of that, a lot heavier. Part of it is growing up with that ego stuff and just a little bit of humility of realizing, like, not only will I not save everybody, I can't save everybody. As you said, can't even save most people. My record as a 12-step sponsor, like if it was a baseball card, it wasn't strong. My experience was the same as like Bill Wilson's, which was the people I was sponsoring weren't really staying sober, but I was. That was the only, Mm-hmm. And so all that to say, yeah, I really can't save everyone, but I also don't believe in a complete cutoffs. I just don't. I definitely believe in boundaries. I believe in protecting yourselves, but I believe that there always has to be a hand outstretched, no matter how deeply mired somebody is in the stuff.
Yeah, they can always come back from it, no matter how far they're gone. I've had a few people on my show because they were going to die. They had end-stage cirrhosis. They had to have a liver transplant, kidney transplant, and they were able to come back from that, And so, yeah, I love how you said that. Like, realizing that you're the lighthouse and that you have to let go of some control, but also keeping like a little hand outstretched. Like,
yes.
That's a great answer. Yeah. I have one more question before we do the lightning round. Okay. What would you say is your biggest blessing that you've received in recovery?
Great question. Oh my gosh. I could say so many things. I have received so many blessings, but to be honest with you, just because it's today that you're asking me, what comes to my mind first is my friend, Amanda Fallon Bennett. She's one of the co-founders of our nonprofit, and she's just opened my eyes. She started her work. She actually herself doesn't have lived experience, but she did her postdoc at a syringe exchange in San Francisco. So she comes from a radically different kind of vantage point. And so she's taught me a lot about recovery and about harm reduction. And I think more important than that, sometimes people say, you're like the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And I'm just really freaking grateful that she's one of my 5 people, because I think she rubs off on me in the best way. She's when we talk about recovery capital, sometimes we think housing and we think tangible assets, but those social assets are a critical part of recovery capital. And she was a critical part of mine and continues to be.
That's awesome. I love that. Well, we have made it to our lightning round. This is a get to know you to close out our episode. So you're given 3 options. The first question, you're given 3 options. You have to pick one. Okay. You're held at gunpoint and you have to pick one. All right. You can either shark dive, bungee jump, or skydive. Which one are you choosing?
Oh my gosh. Shark dive, bungee jump, or skydive.
Uh-huh.
I'm shark diving because I
Okay.
can't do heights. There's no way I can do heights. I mean, I'm terrified of the sharks, I'm sure, but got to choose.
All right, that's a good one. Number two, you're in a simulation. Every time you walk into a room, the same song plays. What's your song?
I don't. The first thing that comes to mind is "Sweet Annie" by the Zach Brown Band song,
Oh my God, I
or
love that
Zach Brown
song.
Band. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's a beautiful song.
It was really
Okay,
popular on country music radio when I was at the Salvation Army. So it's
okay.
yeah,
That's perfect then. It has meaning.
yeah.
Number three, what is your favorite Disney movie?
Mulan.
Okay, I
Yeah,
like that
my
one.
my little sister is adopted from Seoul, South Korea, and she always felt connected to Mulan. So that was our movie. We liked it.
Strong female lead. Yeah, I'm
That's right.
into it. Independent woman.
Yeah.
Strong. Love it. Okay, number four, what is something you're obsessed with?
Learning,
Yeah,
learning, yeah, and specifically learning about addiction and recovery. That's all I want to
yeah,
do is just
yeah.
learn more and more about addiction and recovery.
That curiosity for life and for things that you're passionate about. Absolutely. All right, number five, what does freedom mean to you?
Yeah, freedom is a big, full, wide, deep breath.
Yeah, cleansing, deep breath.
Yeah,
I love that. That's perfect. I can't thank you enough. Honestly, I could talk to you for like 6 hours because I'm also a nerd and I also
yeah.
geek out on recovery, but my platform won't let me do that. But thank you so much. Your story is going to help so much people. I mean, your arc is just insane. And to see the work that you're doing now, what's really cool about the work that you're doing now is that you're extremely passionate. I mean, it comes through how passionate you are to make change, make radical change in an avenue that you needed when you were going through it. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for doing the work that you do.
And back to you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for showing so many different experiences and pathways of recovery. I think that that's a really important way that we shine the light. So appreciate you.